Welcome to the M1 podcast, set up to provide features and stories up and down and in and around the M1. Relax and listen. If you enjoy, please share and like. Say Nothing is the title of a 9-part drama series now on Disney+. Its focus is on the lives of young people in the Troubles who became involved in the IRA. In particular, Dolours and Marian Price, Brendan Hughes, and of course, Gerry Adams features prominently as well. Another central character in the drama is Anthony McIntyre. He was the lead researcher for the Boston College Belfast project, An Oral History of the Troubles. I spoke to Anthony about the programme, about the IRA, his own role and experience, and what led him to live in Drogheda. So Anthony, how do you feel about the programme Say Nothing, which is on Disney at the moment?
The manner in which Dolours Price and Brendan Hughes in particular, and also a generation of young IRA volunteers, have been recast in a more positive, a more understanding, a more compassionate light as a result of that programme. I mean, and particularly Brendan and Dolours, because Gerry Adams, who also features centrally in Say Nothing, has accused both Brendan and Dolours of being liars. These are people that sustained terrible suffering on hunger strikes and blanket protests and prison, and to be called liars by one of the people who led them and has denied being their IRA comrades, I found that appalling. So I'm glad that their role certainly in the Boston College project has been vindicated. I don't want to claim any credit whatsoever.
In an earlier issue of this podcast, the M1 podcast, I did a profile on the Gormanston Army Camp, and what was interesting about that is it became a refugee centre in 1970 to 1972, and more than 10,000 people came from Belfast and surrounding areas to stay in Gormanston over that period of 2 years. But one thing I was struck about, the similarities between the refugee experience coming from the north to the south at that time and the refugees who've come to Ireland in more recent years, the Ukrainians most recently and the Syrians just before that. Because in my interview with Brian Hanley, who's a historian at Trinity College Dublin, he was saying that at first there was a big welcome for the refugees coming from Belfast and surrounding areas, and then there was antipathy and suspicion cast towards them over time. So you grew up in Belfast. How old were you around that time, 1970 to 72, and what was going on for you in your life?
1970, I was 13. I wasn't aware of the antipathy towards the refugees. I was aware of antipathy down here in Dundalk to people, IRA people that had come across the border. But Brian is such a good historian. I know Brian is such a good historian that he would have that right, and be interested to talk to him sometime and listen to him about it. I was in Belfast very young, just after the outbreak of the conflict. Had watched the British Army come in, had watched I don't mean physically watched, but observed on television and talking with friends, the attacks on the nationalist communities in Belfast in 1969. I remember the morning after 1969, the outbreak of the burnings, the sort of police and B Special led attacks on the Falls Road, where streets were burned out and Catholics were burned out of their homes. And the following morning, myself and 3 other young people went up to the falls, and this smell of burnt out homes and burnt out furniture doused in water from fire brigades. There's a particular acrid, odious stench, and I can still smell that mentally when I talk about it and go back to it.
Yeah.
And we found something that day on the falls where we didn't know what it was, and we brought it back with us, and we all gathered over at the railway. We were messing about with it in the railway lane, at this huge railway lane that is now the Enterprise line from Belfast to Dublin. And we're sitting in the railway, and this thing went off with a massive bang. And I've come to the conclusion that what it was a detonator. Mm-hmm. And whatever it was in didn't detonate. I'm really lucky for that. But I remember the stinging in my legs, and we all get stings, and then the ringing in our ears. And we didn't think much more of it, but it's, I suppose in some ways, it's one of my memories of that time.
So you were 13 years of age, 1970. 71 internment was introduced, and you were growing up in West Belfast?
No, I was growing up in South Belfast,
okay.
the Lower Armour Road. Okay. And I was a member of the young Fianna Éireann at that time, the official Fianna Éireann. When I had been asked to join, or my friend was in it. And
that was the thing for young people to get involved in.
Well, it was a young IRA.
Yeah.
There wasn't great numbers in it, but we joined up, and at the time I joined up, there was no provisional. Fianna later it came pretty quickly, I think, after internment. But I remember internment breaking out, and the night before internment, I was over in the Falls Road, Grosvenor Road, Radden, against the British. It was a Sunday evening. It would have been the 8th of August 1971. And I was with two friends, Noel and Frankie. I'll not give their surnames in case they're embarrassed. They're maybe, same age as me, so suppose they're not working, they don't have to worry about jobs. But look, Frankie and Noel were over with me, and we ride all that evening. And the next, it may have been just me and Frankie. The next day, myself and Noel, on the morning of internment, headed over to the Grosvenor Road, Falls Road, and ratted all day against the British. That was the morning internment was brought in. And we would have found ourselves throwing bottles, bricks, whatever came to hand. Sorry. At one point, the British Army officer told us we had a minute. He was speaking from the corner of Albert Street and McDonald Street, and he told us that we had all a minute to clear, or he'd start ordering his troops to shoot us. We pelted him with bricks, and we never got shot. But I remember that time very well. The evening before, we had been standing at the corner of Malt Street on the Grosvenor Road on our way home, and I stand outside the shop, and Noel might have been with us. I know Frankie was, but I just can't remember. But there was a nail bomb thrown into Malt Street from the Leeson Street, if I remember, and the bang was tremendous, and the windows dropped out, and it was shuddering. But it was exciting at that age. I was 14.
The whole thing about rioting throughout the Troubles, it was seen like, in a way, young people here have hobbies and interests, playing football or doing other sporting activities or dancing or whatever it is. Rioting was the recreational hobby for young people at that time. Was that a sense? Or
not really. It was for a very small number of young people. People would throw stones at the British, but the big raids that were taking place in Derry, particular in Belfast, the Derry raids weren't recreational. They were very, very vicious. And Derry people, when we were watching them on TV, riding and going right up to the British soldiers and battering them, and the British soldiers hiding behind their shields, obviously, in their fear of being killed. And the courage with which the riders confronted them, we really admired this as young people, and always thought there was no rider like a Derry rider. So the big raids, I think, blew up at different times, and in response to something that sparked it off, rather than people just going out for a recreational riot. I think at times the media and the press tried to reduce what was an outburst of political violence to something that they do this to pass the time. It's recreational riding.
And well, I was interested in watching the programme because, as you said, the overall effect of it was to change, and the Boston tapes was to change the perception of Brendan Hughes and Dolours Price, because at the start they were different from their parents, Dolours and her sister Marian. Their parents were old IRA and believer of the armed struggle as a way to achieve a united Ireland or whatever, but they were of the belief in non-violence, and they joined the civil rights protests. So that was their route into becoming active.
Well, there's always a debate around what made the Provisional IRA. And I have taken a view that the Provisional IRA, the insurrectionary violence that went into making up the Provisional IRA, was not a response to the British being in Ireland, but a response to how the British behaved while they were in Ireland. So British, I mean, what we would call the Republican physical force tradition existed, but that on its own would never have sustained the insurrection. People were not ideologically tied into this, and you even find people like the Price sisters, who came from a family that was fed on and fed a diet of the physical force tradition, but they were not enamoured to it. They didn't want it. They thought, the sisters thought that it had failed, so they sought to embrace alternative ways. And those alternative ways were closed down by state violence, and people found the Provisional IRA a more attractive option. I mean, I know when I was getting beat or arrested or messed about in the streets by the British Army and chased from corners where we used to gather at nights and stuff, I just felt that I wanted to really hit back at them or do something about it. So I tend to think that, I mean, and it wasn't the pre-existing 1969 IRA tradition that produced the Provisional IRA. It was state violence produced street violence, and that street violence manifested itself in the organisation of the Provisional IRA.
And so you were 15, 16 in 1972, 73.
15 in 1972 and turned 16 in June 1973. I was in prison by June 1974 when I was 16. Still 16, I was in prison.
You were in prison, and what was that for?
Well, at that time I was arrested after the British found a document in my house. It was a school book type thing about a bomb, just about a bomb run. How detailed it was, I no longer remember, but it was enough for them to come after me. And I went on the run, and then they arrested me. When they eventually caught me, my father was able to accompany me. Was at 16 during the interrogations. They allowed him in, and then he would always be able to swear that at no point did I admit being a member of the Provisional IRA, because he had schooled me never to admit anything, no matter what happened. And even though he wasn't a Republican, but he'd always said, if the police ever arrest you, just deny everything, don't admit anything.
Say nothing.
Say nothing, yes, an up term. And I said nothing. But they said that I had conceded that I was a member of the Provisional IRA. And this was a typical tactic of the state at the time. The police was to claim you had made a verbal statement. You know, what they preferred was a written statement. But I decided that, you know, along with the IRA culture, that I would refuse to recognise the court. So I never called my father as evidence, as a witness or anything. But that was it. I was arrested then. The first time I was arrested was on the run, and I went into St Patrick's boys' home. The IRA came up half an hour after I arrived to spring me, but I already sprung myself. By the time the IRA arrived to take me out, I was in Turf Lodge.
Was St Patrick's home was like it wasn't a secure prison, it was like an open detention centre?
It's as easy to walk out of as it is for you to walk out of my home today.
When I was growing up at the age of 15, my mother was putting pressure on me about schoolwork and whatnot, and keeping the head down, as do parents all around the place, and these days in Belfast and Derry and wherever else. And then, like, when we watch the programme, we just see the troubles, the conflict, the streets. Like, what was your sense of direction in life? Like, did you hope to finish school and then get a job or go to college, or what was the idea?
Well, I didn't particularly like school or college, and I was determined to fail everything, and almost failed everything. And to my eternal shame, I passed religious knowledge. I think it's the only one I ended up passing. And I ended up leaving school and going to work as an apprentice tailor with a firm called Tufflow and Jackson. But it was very, very sectarian at the time. Very, very violent place to grow up in 1972 and in 1973. The type of things, you're losing friends, getting killed. The Army Road became known as a way for murder made. I remember one time when I was 16 in 1973, the end of September, started the very end of September, 1st of October 1973, I was Sunday evening sitting in a taxi depot with a girl called Aileen Doherty, 19, from Andersonstown. She was a fiancée of a friend of mine, Alex McManus. And she had gone up the taxi, she left Alex home, gone up the taxi place, just a normal routine. I quite often, when you're bored at that age, you if there was only one person getting a taxi, quite often you go out with taxi drivers. I used to go out with a guy called Ronnie, who was a Protestant, and Ronnie would just go out and pick up his fare and he'd take me with him for the spin, and we'd have a bit of crack. And I was in it this night, but I was on crutches, so I wasn't going to go into taxis, because I'd been on crutches. I'd been drunk the night before, drinking cider with friends, and kicked a glass window in and ripped my tendon. So I was in some pain, but on crutches. But I sat for half an hour chatting away with Aileen, and two guys were in, and I thought they were out of the Workers' Party Club. I thought they'd been down having a drink. There's a local club called, I forget the name of it, the Watering Hole or something. But they had come out of that, and I thought they had come out of that. They actually hadn't. And the next morning, I said my goodbyes to Aileen. After half an hour, taxi still hadn't come, and I went out and left her and home. And the next morning, I got up, and my mum said, Aileen Doherty get shot dead. I said, what? I couldn't believe it. And that day, the news and everything, and the cops coming out and sort of bringing us into Castlereagh and questions about it. I always remember me standing in the street, and this cop approached. He introduced himself as Tommy Meek. And he says, we're investigating this murder last night. And do you know anything suspicious? I said, I was sitting in the taxi depot with her. And the two guys were sitting there. And he was amazed. He says, right, put me into a car and over to Castlereagh. It wasn't an interrogation. They weren't nasty or nothing.
Questions.
Yeah, I mean, they were really, really fine. I can't complain. But and I remember going to the funeral and not being able to carry Aileen's coffin because Aileen, I was on crutches, so wasn't able. That's sort of, when you're growing up in that sort of environment, you can imagine the mindset that it gives you. And I certainly developed a very sectarian mindset as a result of incidents like that.
So when you say sectarian mindset, you developed a hatred against who?
Well, I developed a hatred of unionism, and we didn't really decipher. I didn't distinguish too much between Unionists and Protestants. As far as I was concerned, I began to develop a view that this Protestant community were very, very dangerous, and I wasn't. Even
though you were friends with the Protestant taxi driver.
Yeah, well, I'd grown up with Protestant friends. I'd grown up with Drew MacDonald. I'd grown up with... Drew MacDonald's father was a beef special. He was a beef special that used to take me out on his furniture run and pay me quite well, because I was a young lad. He didn't discriminate against people in his day-to-day life. He was a great neighbour. I grew up with Davy Young. Davy Young was a great friend of mine. Davy moved to Rushden. Early 70s, used to live in Bagot Street with us. And so there were Protestant friends that I grew up with. But yeah, I did develop a very hostile attitude towards them. I seen people who were friends were getting killed. I remember even Joe McCann getting killed in 1972, that morning that Joe McCann got killed, he'd been staying in Mornington Street in the Ormer Road overnight, and myself and Frankie again had walked him out of the area. I'd asked us to scout him. We walked out, and I'd walked up, and when I reached the funeral parlour at the corner of Essex Street and Ormer Road, I went back down, I spotted a cop, and I says, "Joe, there's a cop," and he went into Farrell's bar. And we went on our way, and that evening, or that afternoon, around 3 o'clock, the paratrooper shot Joe dead in Joy Street.
Joe McCann was
an official IRA leader, and 2 British soldiers were recently acquitted of, a number of years ago, acquitted of his killing. Apparently the evidence was...
When you say official IRA, so that was one wing of the IRA, so and you ended up joining the provisionals.
I ended up joining the provisional IRA.
But you were supporting Joe in terms of...
Yeah, well, I was in the official Fianna at the time that Joe died, and I remember that afternoon Joe getting shot dead. I remember the violence after. So there was in my mind, there was a marrying of British state violence and killings against people that I knew, and there was a marrying of that with loyalist attacks on and killings of people that I knew.
Yeah.
But I think one time in McGilligan, if I remember, in 1975, I think there was 4 people killed around the 1 day or 2 day period. I need to go back and check.
McGilligan prison?
Well, I was in McGilligan prison in February 1975. Joe Fitzpatrick was killed. 2 guys I went to school with, Kaylee and Valentine, they were killed. Joey Clark was shot dead in the Ormer Road. Joey was only 18. They went to his house and shot him, and Joey had previously been shot, and known Joey from youth clubs and rads too.
Yeah.
And then a guy called Michael Adamson, who was a member of the Communist Party, and he gets shot dead at his home just before he's about to attend his brother's wedding. So you're knowing all these people, and you're seeing them been attacked by loyalists, and the one I was particularly friendly with out of them all would have been Joe Fitzpatrick. And Joe was a street sweeper, and he was shot dead the morning. So the Irish ceasefire came in. So
you were working in doing tiling, was it, at that stage?
No, when Joe got shot dead, I was in McGilligan prison in 1975. I've been doing tiling up until I went on the run. I was an apprentice Teresa Lair from about August 72 until February 74.
Okay. And you went on the run because...
I went on the run because there was a document found in my home, and then the British began searching for it.
Okay,
searching for me.
That was the first time, was it?
That was the first time. That was in February 74. I went to prison in April 74 and get out in November 75. I got a 2-year sentence, and I got found guilty of IRA membership.
Okay. And what happened then for you? So mid-70s, late 70s?
Well, I was released in November 75, and I resumed my republicanism, and I ended up being convicted for a killing of a UVF member by the name of Kenneth Lenihan that took place on the 27th of February 1976. I was arrested, and along with 2 other people, and the 3 of us were convicted of that and sentenced to life in 1977.
And then you were in prison for a good number of years.
I was in prison for 17 years, I think, all but 2 months. So in total, I did about 18 and a half years in prison.
So that's a long time out of your life, isn't it?
Not as long as the time out of the lives of those who died. People like the hunger strikers, people like IRA volunteers, people like the young British soldiers that the IRA killed, people, many Catholics, many loyalists.
Yeah.
So it was a life lived differently. I don't regret it. I never see it as time out of my life. I just see it as a life lived differently.
And you were involved in the hunger strikes as well, were you?
I was involved in a hunger strike in 1974. Hated every minute of it. The 21-day hunger strike after the riots in Loncash and the riot in Crumlin Road Jail, and we were locked up. Brendan Hughes led that hunger strike. I was involved for 3 days at the end of the first 1980 hunger strike. We were brought on as a second tier, second wave. I was in the cell with Big Lawrence McCune. Big Lorney's a writer now and a film director, a very capable guy, but I got to know him. Then for the 1981 hunger strike, which we volunteered to go on, and I remember Bick McFarlane explaining to me that people like him and me would not be allowed on that hunger strike because there was a problem with the type of activity that we were in for. We would be too easily depicted as sectarian killers, and therefore it wouldn't be good for publicity. Luckily for me.
Yeah. And the programme very early on shows Dolours Price having regrets, or she says, well, didn't say it was pointless, all for nothing.
Say nothing and all for nothing. I suppose it's a nice turn of phrase, nice combination of words. Yeah, I mean, the IRA fought to put the British out of Ireland. They fought for a British declaration of intent to withdraw, and ended up settling for a British declaration of intent to stay. The IRA campaign was aimed at coercing the British state out of Ireland, and was a total repudiation of the consent principle. The British compelled or manoeuvred the IRA into a situation where they accepted the British consent principle, the Unionist consent principle. The British never insisted on staying in the country for ever and a day. What the British were insisting on was the terms on which they would leave the country, only by consent. And the Provisional IRA came to embrace that position. They sometimes talk about a military stalemate, but my view is that there's a military stalemate as such, it would have manifested itself in a political draw, and a political draw would have been joint sovereignty, joint authority. We didn't get that. What they ended up getting was the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement was an ethical repudiation of force, and so the IRA campaign failed, and people like Dolours felt that made it not worthwhile.
Characters like yourself, Dolours Price, Brendan Hughes, and in the programme Say Nothing, Brendan is quite a swashbuckling, charismatic type of character. Were they seen as leaders? Did a lot of people aspire and follow them?
Well, Brendan Hughes was the brigade commander of Belfast, the Brigade OC of Belfast, after his escape in December 1973 until May 1974, when he was arrested under the assumed name of Arthur McAllister on the Malone Road, Myrtlefield Park, in May 1974. So he was the commander of the 2nd Battalion, which was responsible for most of the killings of British soldiers. He was also the officer in charge of, the volunteer in charge of D Company, which was a famous Falls Road company, itself responsible for many killings of British soldiers. Dolours Price explained to me that she was the operational commander in London for the London bombing operation. So they were people who were looked up to.
The London bombing was the bombing of the courts.
It was the bombing of the Old Bailey courts in 1973. It took place on the day that the British government were holding a referendum here holding a referendum in the north on whether or not the country would be united. It was a border poll. So the very thing that the IRA, the background, the backdrop to the IRA bombing London was what today has been called the solution, a border poll.
Yeah.
So, that's 51 years ago, and it shows you how little the IRA campaign achieved in terms of the constitutional question.
So there was a poll?
There was a poll in 1973, March 1973, and the bombings took place that day to flip the bird to the
polls in Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales?
No, it was the border poll in Northern Ireland
only,
and that was to decide the future of Northern Ireland. Because the reason that there was a border poll, when the British under the Northern Ireland Act had sort of put in place legislation that allowed the future of the North's constitutional status to be determined by the Northern Parliament. When the Northern Parliament was abandoned in 1972, they had to rework that, as there was no Northern Parliament to decide the future. So the future then had to be decided by a majority of people within the North, and therefore you had the border poll.
They carried out those attacks at that time. And the Sunningdale Agreement was 74, 75?
Sunningdale Agreement it was devised around November 1973 in Sunningdale in England. That's where it was hammered out and put into effect in 1974 and collapsed in May 1974. The IRA rejected it. Gerry Adams later wrote that it was the first time that a Catholic Protectionist party had been produced in the North, the SDLP. He failed to mention it because he wasn't. The Good Friday Agreement hadn't come at the time when he was writing it. But when it did come, he never mentioned the fact that Sinn Féin were now the second protectionist Catholic Protectionist party.
Seamus Mallon said the Good Friday Agreement was Sunningdale for slow learners.
Well, he was right. I was amazed at times when we were debating the Good Friday Agreement, or even before it came in, because I was at a Sinn Féin meeting one time, and Tom Hartley and Jim Gibney, people who I was friendly with, were on the panel, and I was saying, there's something wrong here. We are heading in the direction of a Sunningdale. It's the only outcome. And they were patronising me, and Jim was calling me Tony, and he was saying, Tony, you don't understand politics. And Tom Hartley was saying the same, and I was sitting thinking to myself, I understand politics much better than you two. You only understand what Gerry tells you.
You referred to yourself, I think, as being perceived as a thought criminal in the early 1990s in terms of your position on the peace process and the road to the Good Friday Agreement, and their characterisation of you as a sympathiser of dissidents.
Well,
you rejected militarism at the same time.
I rejected militarism. I rejected not just militarism, because I don't reduce the physical force, the IRA's campaign, to mere militarism. And I had argued that the IRA campaign, the military response, was very much a political response. It wasn't mindless militarism, but I rejected the military option. When in 2000, October 2000, when the IRA assassinated the real IRA leader in West Belfast, Joe O'Connor, myself and Tommy Gorman wrote a piece condemning it and identifying the IRA as the organisation that carried it out, and stipulating very clearly that never again should republicanism take life in pursuit of its goals. I don't mind being called a dissident. I think dissident's pretty. Dissident used to be a great term when we think of the Soviet dissidents and the people who dissented. And if it wasn't for dissenters and dissidents, we'd still be living in caves, because who would put their head above the parapet and say maybe it's time we build houses? So I was castigated. I was called a dissident. I was accused by Gerry Adams of being a fellow traveller of the real IRA. And over the course of time in the North, in the context of the North, the term dissident more or less became a term for indistinguishable from deviant.
Yeah.
So I was regarded pretty much as a thought criminal, and I wrote about these things, like, how dare you think a way that, how dare you think in a way that we don't think you should think.
And so if militarism wasn't the way, say, 1970s, or you talk about, I suppose you're a product of your time, and the state violence, the violence of the UVF, UDA and the IRA being a reaction to that, and the failure of the civil rights movement, what would have been the right way, do you think, to pursue equality and civil rights, maybe?
Well, I don't think the civil rights movement had failed. By 1973, the civil rights movement had got many things that it had pushed for. My own view is that I always go back to Albert Camus on these matters. And this is my reason for not condemning the Provisional IRA campaign or dissociating myself from the Provisional IRA campaign. I try to understand it. I don't offer justification for it, I offer mitigation for it. It was... Camus once described war and violence, and the violence of war, as it's as unjustifiable as it is unavoidable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a paradox at the heart of the IRA campaign. It was as unavoidable as it is unjustifiable. And what do you do in that certain situation? And if it has happened all over again, would we do the same? Not if it was 67, but if it was 16, yes, I would. And I think that young people tend to respond in certain ways to this state of violence and this state of oppression. And but I do think that when we look back and with the benefit of hindsight, we know that the sheer weight of numbers, we know that unionism wouldn't have been able to hold. We can rest assured that we could have got what we have now, or at least much more democracy without all the people that were lost. We were never going to get a united Ireland. It was an impossible demand. I think the real problem with the IRA campaign was the articulation of the United Ireland demand to the IRA's campaign itself. And this was coming from the old Republican tradition. But I think the structural factors in the North led to a certain outcome. They're pointed in the direction of a certain outcome, and that's the outcome that we have. And my criticism of it is that why did it take so long? Why did we not accept it in 1974? Why did we go through all this and put everybody else through this? And then why did the hunger strikers die? Why did the victims of the IRA die? I mean, why did the milkman Desmond Guinea and his son die on the Antrim Road on the same day Bobby Sands died? I mean, had the IRA accepted this type of thing earlier, none of that need have happened.
I know that Brendan Hughes had such a central involvement in those early days, and he was seen as the organiser of the Bloody Friday bombing, where 22 bombs went off in Belfast in one day, and he talked about later his regret about that. And it also, the reports I've seen recently, is that he made a lot of efforts to try and reduce the human damage to what had gone on there. It was intended to be a spectacular, but...
Well, the problem was, and Brenton acknowledged this later, and he wasn't the only person responsible. Brenton was responsible for the 2nd Battalion's side of things. He wasn't yet on the brigade staff. I mean, Brendan was deeply sort of shocked by this. Brendan Hughes wasn't naturally instinctively violent person. And I remember an incident one time in the jail. I came back down from Lancash, and there was a guy who was been debriefed or interrogated because it was believed he was on the Republican wings, but actually links to the British Army. And there was a big scare at that time called the MRF scare. And we were in a cell talking to this guy, myself, Brendan, and a guy from Derry, Sean McKilliam, who's since died. And Sean punched the guy in the head, I think hurt his hand, and Brendan immediately intervened. He says, "No, don't be doing that. Don't be doing that." And I mean, there are things that I remember about Brendan, but Brendan, I think Brendan was haunted by the loss of life. And I think that was compounded by he felt was the political opportunism of some of the people who sent her, who were superiors, and who give him directions to carry out operations which resulted in the loss of life. Brendan said for long enough that the IRA tried to blame the British Army and the RUC. He says, but they didn't give the British Army and the RUC any real chance to clear the areas that... and he accepts responsibility that Bloody Friday was not the fault of the British Army and the RUC, but it's the fault of the IRA.
In the programme, it early on shows how Dolours and her sister Marian Price came across Gerry Adams at a barricade in Belfast, and he's on his megaphone giving the orders about how to riot properly. And the first question she asks is, who gave that guy his job? And how did he become so how did he gain his position of prominence and power.
What Dolours actually says was, when she saw Gerry standing on the soapbox preaching, she said, "Geeky Gerry Adams, how did he get in there?" So these were families that were Republican families, or Republican sort of. I mean, Belfast Republicanism was described by Adams as being incestuous, and I think that's true. So they knew each other. They might have known each other well, but she knew him when she seen him, and referred to him as Geeky Gerry Adams. Adams was a very clever guy, obviously very clever, and I think in a different life, had he not have been an IRA volunteer, an IRA commander, he had the intellectual ability to become a university professor, or succeed in all their walks of life. And
he was a young adult at this time, was he?
Well, he was in his early 20s. By 70, he'd been 21 in 1969. When the Ballymurphy riots started, he'd probably been 22. So he had a strategic brain. And if you think most of the IRA volunteers, the death back in the 70s, the average age of IRA volunteers that were down was no higher than 20.
Yeah.
20 years of age. So he was leading young people, and One-Eyed Man is king of the blind. I don't want to say it disparagingly, but just want to draw some sort of some comparator, use some comparator, and he quickly rose to the top and using a strategic mind. And the minister can see he was a very manipulative character. So he was able to move into positions and move others into positions that would do his bidding, or at least allow him to get over the line the type of ideas and strategies that he had.
Because he used terms like child, and as Dolours Price says, "Why you call me child? I'm only a year younger than you."
Well, it was a familiar Adams term, child. I remember people used to comment on it, that he would always call people child, and then some of the people in the prison would emulate him, and they would start calling people child. But he was known for using the term child and addressing people, and it was condescending, I suppose. Did he mean it that way? I don't know. I mean, was he brought up getting called child himself and just replicating the behaviour that he learned? I don't know, but it certainly adds to a veneer, or at least it adds to an image of him as being condescending, someone that thought he had an automatic right to rule over the lives of the children who he directed. But I'm always wary of colloquialism.
And in the programme it talks about the unknowns. What were the unknowns?
Well, the strange thing about the unknowns is that people that I had spoken to, I came across the unknowns when I was doing my PhD, and we later worked on it during the Boston College project. The Unknowns was a secret squad that was developed by, according to Brenton and Dolours, it was put in place by Gerry Adams. Similar to the Hunger Strike Committee 9 years later. And it tended to exist outside the wider IRA command structure, and so the people in it were answerable to Gerry. But Brenton and Dolours would say that the unknowns, who were supposed to be unknown, when they arrived in the local areas, the local volunteers would say, here's the unknowns. So they weren't that known.
They knew.
Yeah. And they were a squad that would have carried out, they were like a special ops team. They carried out operations that maybe other volunteers wouldn't have wanted to carry out. And for example, the disappeared strategy that started in Belfast in 1972, that was the work of the unknowns.
That's Jean McConville is prominently featured in the programme, and
yes, Mrs. McConville, she prominently features, as does her family. Very moving. But the first of the disappeared that we are aware of, and we have to be careful here because Joe Lenski is the first of the disappeared. But what we do know is that Joe was double disappeared. The IRA not only disappeared Joe, but for many years disappeared the fact that they had disappeared him, and didn't own up to it until many years later. And even when they put the initial statement out and a list of the bodies of the people that disappeared, they didn't mention him. I mean, there could be others. I'm not sure. People have speculated that there are others. I don't know of any others, but and it seems to me, to the best of my knowledge, Joe Linsky was the first.
He was featured in the programme as well. There's Jean McConville, and her kids are 10 kids.
10 children.
It was just a perception that she had sympathised with a British soldier who'd been injured, or who was...
That's what the programme has conveyed. And it's also tried to communicate the IRA narrative, but it did it in a weak manner. Now, by having Dolours Price say that she was identified as an informer through red slippers, and in the dialogue between, in the film anyway, I mean, I don't actually know if this happened. I mean, Alison Morris would be better placed to tell us if it's in, like, because
Alison Morris
is the journalist who was speaking to Dolours Price, and she's at the home with Dolours Price. And Dolours, Alison and Dolours are talking about this, and Alison asks her, what's the evidence? And Dolours says, well, she had red slippers, people identified her red slippers, and Alison said, I've red slippers.
Yeah.
Now, but you would need to talk to Alison to find out if that's the exact way it happened. Because, I mean, Alison also pointed out that there was a lot of poetic license use, and there is. I mean, saying nothing is, to a large extent, relies on the use of artificial microprops for the very purpose of communicating an authentic meta-narrative. I think it works quite well in that. I mean, if you're a historian, you probably, with an attention or an eye for detail, and you're fastidious, you'll probably, lots of things that will annoy you. But if you're not a historian and you enjoy drama that conveys a deeper message, then I think that, you will appreciate the show all the more. But there is a view. What I will say is that the IRA were convinced that she was an informer on the basis of more than red slippers, and that the IRA people to this day are convinced that she was an informer. But whether she was an informer or not, the IRA should never have killed her. There were other options that the IRA could have used. I mean, the IRA could have quite easily went into her flat, destroyed every appliance in it, smashed up the pipes, smashed up the heat, made it uninhabitable, and forced her out. And what was she going to do? She'd probably have to go to another area where she would be no threat to the IRA. As I understand it, the IRA didn't want to kill her initially. Their attitude was that they went to the Catholic Church and asked the Catholic Church to move her out. The Catholic Church washed their hands of her, and at that point the decision was taken to execute her and disappear her. There was a dispute within the IRA over it, and over it disappeared in general. You had senior IRA commanders saying, look, there's no point in killing these people and hiding them. Well, that's not an act of deterrence. Nobody knows what happens. Just shoot them dead if they're informers, and put them in the street where everybody will see them. And this was overruled, and the decision was taken to disappear them. And I think that, and this is what makes it a war crime. The killing of spies, or people who are alleged to be spies, is not a war crime. It happens in every war. It happens in every sort of conflict. I mean, spies have less protection under rules of war than soldiers in uniform. But the disappearing of this woman and the disappearing of the other people was, in my view, an IRA war crime.
And that was the work of the unknowns.
That was the work of the unknowns, yes. But I mean, the unknowns were a group within the IRA. The IRA leadership knew that these people were disappeared. So we can't wash our hands of it and say, well, it was just those who were in the unknowns carried this out. And so this war crime was carried out by the IRA. There's corporate responsibility here.
And after you came out of prison, you embarked on your PhD to reflect on the Troubles. Your topic was...
Well, I don't know if I embarked on it to reflect on the Troubles. I embarked on it because it was something I knew something about.
Yeah.
It was an area I knew something about. I've been interested in it. I got a first-class honours degree in prison through the Open University while I was in prison. But I had studied. It was global politics, international politics. I came out and I applied to do a PhD, and I did my PhD was in I called it a structural analysis of modern Irish republicanism, 1969 to 1973. I've heard some criticisms of it that it was an anti-peace process tract. I must have had some foresight to be writing about the peace process when it was only covered up to 1973. I did that, and I began. I mean, from the end of 93, I was writing articles. I was writing for Jim Gibney says just put yourself down as an independent Republican. At that time, the articles were questioning like the Downing Street Declaration, but over the course of time, they began to become more critical, ask more questions of Sinn Féin leadership, which it didn't like being asked. And then after the first ceasefire, the second ceasefire in 1997, I wrote one in the Sunday Tribune, really outlining the limitations of the strategy. And
the Sinn Féin strategy.
The IRA strategy,
Yeah.
Sinn Féin strategy, the Republican strategy. And I had done a number of TV interviews, and I had said, look, it's impossible for this strategy to lead to United Ireland. It just can't happen.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. And I had referred to it in the Sunday Tribune article. The strategy was akin to building a tunnel to the moon. Yes, you can get to the moon, but you can't build a tunnel to one. So why are we building tunnels to the moon? And I found that they didn't like, Sinn Féin didn't like this. It was a strange thing was I went to the RDS Special Conference in October 95, and I'd outlined the shortcomings of the strategy, and I said, look, it's a protectionist solution.
This is a conference of
Sinn Féin activists, special delegate, special conference. I turned up. They tried to stop me speaking because they says I'd already spoken for I'd spoken for South Belfast Sinn Féin, but I was mandated to speak for them. I then said, well, now I'm going to speak, and Rita O'Hare says to me, well, you can't, you've already spoken. And I said, well, look, I'm going to get up and take the mic anyway. But you're going to be embarrassed because you're going to have to try and stop me taking the mic and have something to say. And I went up and I got a standing ovation from about 1,000 people.
You got a standing ovation?
Yeah, for outlining what I thought was wrong. And apparently Matt Tracy later told me it was, what I had said was more meeting with a lot of discussion and reflection in the bars after and around the Dublin Commons. And a senior IRA figure met me one day in the graveyard in West Belfast. I was going through the graveyard, and so was he. And he says, can I have a copy of that speech that you give to the RDS? He says, I hear it's very interesting because it really puts it up the leadership, and that it's going to, that the integrity of the army is going to be destroyed. So this was the type of thing that was happening. But the reason I'm making this point is that 5 years later, I'm having Sinn Féin mobs outside my home, picketing my home, trying to intimidate my pregnant wife. All because we had said that the IRA had killed Joe O'Connor. But I knew they were trying to set me up anyway because they always wanted to silence me. Even when I was, I remember when I was manning the Sinn Féin Centre in the Lower Humber Road. I used to move from Ballymurphy, and at times it could have been difficult because at the end of 1997, after Billy Wright was shot, the loyalists were targeting Catholics, and our nationalists, and our centre was right on the very edge of the Lower Humber Road, the railway bridge. Just across the railway bridge was the loyalist area. And I used to make a point of travelling from Ballymurphy to go over every morning and make sure I opened it before any of our other activists went into it. I felt, right, I'll take this risk here. I don't want some of our maybe less unassuming people walking in and getting hit by these people. So, I would have been pretty committed to the whole thing.
So your criticism about the peace process strategy was that it's building a tunnel to the moon, that you can't really do that. So what was your proposition instead?
Well, I remember Brenton saying, and I was just listening to his interview the other day on Radio Free Ireland. Brenton says that he didn't have an alternative strategy.
Brendan
Hughes says that he didn't have an alternative strategy, but he thought Republicans, it was in the gift of Republicans to come together and develop one. My own view was that, look, that we should build up our political strength, that we didn't have to get sucked into political systems, that we should form a body, North and South, similar to the Socialist Alliance that had existed in England, and that we should develop an oppositional radical politics, and that there were a number of options that we could consider, that rather than settling for an internal solution, we should press, if it was really a stalemate, we should press for joint authority at the very minimum. That we should also consider the moving the veto from, because there was a democratic deficit here, and we felt that why should the unionists in the north, why should a majority of people in the north decide something that affects what was called the whole United Kingdom and Ireland? So why not even shift the veto to the people of the UK? And if you shift the veto to the people of the UK and take it out of the north, then the leaders of unionism would have to be much more amenable to reasoned, non-bigoted discussion when they met. Otherwise, they feared the risk of people in England saying, fuck that, we're sick of these dinosaurs, just boot them out of the UK altogether. And the third option was that there could have been, a re-partitioning, and this would have been trying to dismantle partition on a county-by-county basis. So you would have been arguing at that time, all right, the consent principle is enshrined in 6 counties, but if it's enshrined in 6 counties and applies to only 6, why does it have to, if it's on a county-by-county basis and a county becomes a unit, why should Tyrone have to live under British rule?
Yeah.
Why should Derry have to live under British rule? Why can people not vote to withdraw? Now, and if they withdraw, then the North becomes less and less a sustainable political entity. And, these things may ultimately never have come to anything, but there were different ways of thinking. The leadership, Gerry Adams once said, nobody can be allowed to think that there's an alternative to the Good Friday Agreement. He didn't want to think there was one. He never searched for one.
And so that was your idea, and you espoused that in the year 2000 after your article about the killing of Joe
O'Connor. Well, we discussed the ideas rather than espoused, and we weren't we were just floating ideas around. Wasn't that I ruled those ideas in? What I definitely ruled out was a continuation of armed struggle.
Yeah. And so why they were picketing your house. Relationships became very difficult then. You are no longer an insider.
No, I was very much on the outside, and they began to picket my home. There was 2 pickets on it. The first time, we arrived in downtown to collect my wife. She wasn't my wife then; she was 6 months pregnant. I went downtown to collect it, and I had heard that Tommy Gorman's house was being picketed by a Sinn Féin mob led by a woman called Mary Cush, who was later made a councillor, Sinn Féin councillor. So we headed up to give Tommy support. And by the time we got to his house, we got a phone call telling me, don't come over here, they're outside your house. And there's men have just went into a house up the street, 12 men, and we fear that they will attack you. Because the neighbours in the street were very friendly to me. So it seemed that Sinn Féin were trying to manufacture an incident which I could be violently attacked. This is what we presume, we don't know for sure. The second time they did it, I had gone to Cookstown for a conference of all things in free speech, and we had this mob again appeared outside my house, and my wife came out and she confronted them. One of the neighbours was very unhappy with this, and she came over and climbed over our fence and stood shoulder to shoulder with my wife and told the mob to be ashamed of themselves and take themselves off. Some of the people in the mob that was outside the house didn't really want to confront a pregnant woman. So, others would have been a pregnant woman. So, you know, there was no violence, but my wife took ill after it, and so the pressure was on us. The pressure was really on us to silence us.
That's mad behaviour for a party that was developing a political representation.
Well, it is, but the point was that they were, from the top down, they wanted to control the narrative, and they didn't want their view on anything challenged. The PSNI, well, the RUC, they were called in, colluded with them in this. And people were saying about the RUC and them flashing lights at each other as they were driving past the street and while they were coming around to pick up my home. The PSN, the RUC then put out a statement saying that they were worried about the feud developing because of some of the discourse in the papers between the provisional IRA and the real IRA. There was no discourse in the papers between the real IRA. I was never a member of the real IRA.
Yeah.
I opposed the real IRA. I was deeply critical of the real IRA. I just thought that the real IRA members should not be shot dead by
arbitrarily.
Yeah, by at all by the provisional IRA, which was what was happening, and they really wanted to control the narrative, and even though they were, my problem with the peace process is that I was not opposed to the peace, I was opposed to the process, because the peace process was not a peaceful process. The IRA continued to use violence, it continued to threaten dissident republics, it continued to threaten, intimidate, or try to intimidate people like myself. So we didn't give in.
They haven't gone away, you know.
Well, yes, this was the Adams comment at the City Hall in relation to one of the Kelly.
I think it was Eamon McCann who said that the whole Stormont and the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, institutionalised sectarianism.
Well, very much institutionalised sectarianism. It never transcended it. Paul Viewpoint was one of the first people, my supervisor Queen's one of the first people to point this out to me. And what had happened was it institutionalised sectarianism.
Paul Bew was a unionist, sympathising academic.
Yeah. But a very good academic. A great supervisor to me when I was doing my PhD. So I would talk to Paul regularly. He knew what Sinn Féin was trying to do. Everybody knew what Sinn Féin was trying to do. There's nobody believed that the IRA, Sinn Féin tried to put out the myth that the IRA was not responsible for the killing. The IRA put out a statement in which it lied, saying it didn't carry out the killing. The IRA leadership came into my home, Bobby Story, and another man, and basically the purpose was to intimidate me. Story was pretty relaxed, just get through the motions. The older person was very, very aggressive, and he put his head right tight against mine. And I remember a funny part, my wife started to get upset, and Story says, don't worry about this, we know each other, this happens all the time. And I quite like Bobby Story, even though many differences with him, but he's a very capable person. But however, this was the type of pressure they were putting us under, and after the IRA visited the house, there was a picket in the house immediately after Joe O'Connor's funeral. So we had all this.
And you decided to move south of the border to...
Well, I didn't move for quite a while. We started the Blanket, and the Blanket was a journal of protest and dissent, and we did this in 2000, started this around 2001, and it became well, I was the main writer, but the editors were my wife Carrie and a man called Liam O'Rourke. Liam's an academic, very clever guy, very capable guy. They were the co-editors. I was probably the lead columnist, and I wrote regularly for it. But it carried a newshound, and Sinn Féin began to try and put pressure on newshound to stop carrying it, because it was getting so many page views that it became the flag bearer of, the standard bearer of a critical Republican analysis of the peace process.
You sold that or circulated?
No, it was online, and it became it was taking something like 15,000 hits a day.
Right.
It was a newshound. It was getting quoted regularly. I remember one time talking England. We were at a conference and we met RUC people be at the conference of the British Irish Association, and one of them was saying to me that somebody had come in one morning and briefing them and had mentioned but I can't remember what the situation was, but he says his response to whoever was the senior officer doing the briefing was, sure, we know that, we read about it in the blanket this morning.
And so what stage did you decide to leave Belfast? At that stage you're 13 in 1970, so this is 30 years later, so 43.
30, yeah, well, by the time I left Belfast in 2007, I would have been, 49.
Yeah, okay.
49, 2 children, I had no work at that time. But I was prepared to stay and see. I thought that I may be able to get some work in. I was on the social welfare, and it was embarrassing. I mean, because I remember going down one time again, the social welfare said to me, you shouldn't really be here. I mean, you should be on any job. I mean, what they're messing you about, because they knew. And
you had your PhD and you weren't able to get paid work, or
you wouldn't get work in West Belfast of any sort. So I came down here and into the building. I talked to a former Republican prisoner I knew from the hunger strikes. He's a friend of mine, Tom McPhailey, and I got work with him. And I was working out of Belfast for 6 months, and then he got me a house. He actually put up the money to get me this house. You have to put out a deposit, something about 38,000 or something. I didn't have £38. There was no way I could, but he put it up, and we got the house. And then I paid him back because we sold the house in Belfast.
Okay.
And I paid him back. Worked for him for a couple of years. Ended up.
How did you come to buy a house in Belfast?
Well, we were in a rented. We were in a house that was a what do you call a council house?
Yeah.
A council house. But then the council gave first option to buy, and it was reduced. You got the you were able to reduce the house, you know. Okay. So it was a really good price. So my wife thought, go for it. I remember talking to Brenton Hughes, and he got me an accountant who explained everything and just what forms to fill in.
Yeah.
So we did all this, and we got the house. I mean, it ended up we were paying something like a mortgage of about $300 a month.
Yeah.
Which, if you're working, you could sustain quite easily, but if you're not working, it's quite different.
Yeah.
So we managed. We ended up selling the house after we got work. We were able to put the house on the market. We came down. We picked Drogheda because my wife had previously, when she first came to Ireland, she moved to Drogheda. She had a Sinn Féin friend living in Drogheda.
Where is she from?
My wife, she's from Fullerton in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
And so she came here, and then she came down. This is the association with Drogheda. She knew Drogheda. And I come down and stayed a couple of times with Sheila Mulligan, brought my daughter down. Sheila was the godmother. Sheila was very religious and very Sinn Féin. I was not of the two. But, she's a great woman, very talented woman, loving, caring woman. And we get on great with Sheila. And so the day we came down, Sheila did just a house hunt. Sheila took us around all the houses, and we were looking at Meadowview. And we eventually came here, and I fell in love with it instantly. Yeah. When we got the house, we moved in October the 13th, 2008. And we're now here. That makes us, we're here, 16 years, or was it?
Yeah.
2007.
So,
2007, we're here 17 years.
You've come to settle in Drogheda, and what's life like been since?
Well, life in Drogheda is, I like Drogheda. I have been in, I was one of the things I joined early was the old Drogheda Society. And I became the editor of their yearly journal. I did it for 3 years. And
you were saying about the pickets in your house. That wasn't the reason you decided to flee. But
no, look, there's an urban myth going around. It still goes around to this day, so you can't really dispel it. But it is for what it is. That Sinn Féin drove us out of Belfast. By the time that we left Belfast, Sinn Féin neighbours were back in the street talking to us again. Yeah. And that there wasn't that tension. But my wife always knew that at some point when my children would be at school or in Ballymoor, they were going to get hassled, you know, because it's such a closed community of one mind. I mean, like even youngsters are coming out and saying, you know, vote Gerry Adams. And I remember one time my daughter came in to me, and she was 5 or 6, and she said, I don't like Protestants. And I says, why? She says, because they shoot you. And I said, right, okay. Who told you that? And she told me. It was a wee friend, harmless kid.
Yeah, children, yeah.
So next day I took her on a bus, took her down to where Davy Adams, the loyalist guy, was living. Former member of the UDA, good writer. I've known Davy quite a while. Brought her in. So me and Davy sat chatting, drinking coffee for 3 hours. And the 3 hours we were there, my daughter, played with Davy's mother-in-law. So on the way back in the bus, I said to her, what do you think of that woman? She says, great, loved her. I said, you know, she's a president. Is she? I said, she didn't shoot you. Treated you very well. Said yes. So after a few years down here, my daughter came home from school one day and says to me, what's a Protestant?
Yeah.
And I said, success.
She'd forgotten.
She'd forgotten. And I thought, I mean, down here, people, what I love about down here, you know, there are no one care what your next door neighbour's religion is. Nobody down here is defined by religion.
Yeah, I think for children who grow up here in the schools, they can have so many different nationalities. It's like when I was growing up, as you become an adult, you might want to travel the world, but for my daughter, she's in school, she can travel the world by just actually talking to her classmates and learning about their countries and cultures. And it's a very interesting way to grow up.
Yeah. What I love about children, as I found, you learn with children, they're colourblind.
Yeah.
I mean, when my children were, if I was travelling in buses with them and they were meeting black kids, like, I mean, instantly they took them. There was they just didn't mention colour, and I thought that was great. And that's the same in relation to religion.
And you perceive, like, we talked about like the whole era of the Troubles, and then linked with that, I suppose what we have now in the Republic of Ireland is a changed society where once we were a country of emigration, now we're a country of immigration. Do you think there are issues about Irish identity, about like the language, for example? Like we still, kids go to school and they don't learn the language and are even hostile to it, or not understanding its importance.
Well, you see, I'm a creature of convenience. I wish we'd all the one language. I'm a globalist. I wish we'd all the one government. I don't wish we all eat the one food, but I do wish we had all the one currency. I like that. I don't get too caught up in these things. My daughter's a fluent Irish speaker. My son can speak Irish. I can speak some Irish. My daughter slags me off. She says, answer in your pidgin Gaelic. She's fluent. She's a master's in it. And Irish identity. I mean, we're a multiplicity of identities. I don't like identity politics. I don't like the woke Stasi that try and tell us that we should identify in one particular way or not another. I would support the likes of, all the things that say what woke people support. I'm not woke, I'm left. I would support the things that the woke, for example, trans. I would be fully supportive of trans rights. But I don't believe that if a man believes he's a woman, that's fine, he's a reason for doing that. I don't believe that everybody else should be forced to believe it. I believe that all these issues should be discussed. I so often see in the woke community, I quite like many woke people, but there's a group there which I call woke tards, and they're the left equivalent of the fascists, and they are self-righteous, think they're superior to everybody else, and that nobody else can have a different idea from them. And I think it's very, very dangerous, because I think freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry, freedom of expression is a very, very important universalistic left-wing concept, and we cannot be suppressing it, and we cannot be behaving like the Zionists every time that somebody raises a question. Should it be about Barbie Kardashian, or should it be about the gender dysphoria sort of treatments and interventions, that we should not be shouting homophobe, fascist. That's just the way the Zionists behave. When you criticise what Israel's doing, you're immediately accused them of an anti-Semite.
Yes, it's there's been a reaction against it, and we're now in potentially treacherous, unstable, terrible times.
I think I feel for my children. It's often said that the worst time to have a son is 18 years before a war. And I'm looking at my children now, 19, 23, and they were born 19 years and 23 years before the second rise of Trump. Before Israel, the latest Israeli genocide. I feel strongly about the way the world's going. I'm looking at climate change issues, and I'm looking at Russian aggression and war crimes in Ukraine. I'm looking at Israeli aggression and war crimes and genocide in Gaza. And I'm watching the Americans with total disrespect for any concept of international law. I noticed the Israeli foreign minister saying last night that he expects Americans to punish the ICC. I mean, the American political system, it just wants to establish hegemony. It doesn't want to establish justice. I mean, and I looked at the way the American president, Genocide Joe, welcomed the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, and then criticises the ICC for issuing one for Netanyahu and Gallant. And I'm saying to myself, like, whatever Putin has done, and he's an absolute monster. He's not as monstrous as Netanyahu. And the Ukrainian people are lucky that they've been attacked by Russia and not been attacked by Israel, because if they were attacked by Israel, America would supplying the bombs.
So, Anthony, we've talked a lot about the programme Say Nothing on Disney. I thoroughly recommend it. I think you've been enjoying watching it too.
I don't know if I could say I enjoy it. I appreciate it. It's not. I don't want to attach enjoyment to something that's so harrowing, so
and close to home.
Yes, and terrible for the families that are watching, particularly the families of the disappeared. And so I don't want to. I mean, it's not entertainment. It impacts me on I'm absorbed by it rather than enjoying it.
In 1970, you were saying that you were 13 years of age at that time, and the North is in turmoil, and you got caught up in it. You're a product of your time. You got involved in the IRA, and like so many others did. What was your young person in Belfast or Derry or wherever in the North or in the South feeling a sense of injustice about society, concern about the world? What would your advice be to a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old young person be today?
Well, when I was 16, 17, 14, 16, 15, whatever, I certainly wasn't going to listen to a 67-year-old, and I'm not sure they'll listen to me. But I do think that the advice that I have to try and give them is that try and go with what might work as distinct from what doesn't work. And a fragmented left or woke left does not work. Get involved in all the good, positive campaigns. But there's only a limited amount of things that you will achieve. And energy and political commitment, they're like courage, they're not finite resources, they will run out. So identify causes that are dear to your heart. Causes like the right of Ukraine not to be invaded by a foreign aggressor, the right of Gaza not to be subject to genocide, climate change, trans rights, women's rights, and then look out the party that you think, or the organisation, or the network that you feel is going to be most conducive to helping inch, because this is the only way we're going to do it. There's not going to be revolutions. How we inch these things forward. And don't become dogmatic. Do not become doctrinaire. I'd probably like to quote Mark Twain and say that I can understand these people and their young age and their enthusiasm. They're great, and I watch the young people fighting around climate change, and I watch some of the old people sort of trying to say it's not caused by human activity, and I despair. I love what the young people are doing. But I'm glad that I'm no longer young enough to know everything. And just avoid dogma, and avoid people who preach dogma to you, and be open to all manner of ideas. Be intellectually promiscuous.
Thank you. We can understand why ex-paramilitaries were willing to talk to Anthony for the Boston College Belfast project. He was one of them. He had been in prison for 18 years. He'd been through what they had been through. And throughout listening to him and watching Say Nothing, there was an important line said there about the violence not because of the British presence, but because of the behaviour of the British. Questions keep coming back. Was it all for nothing? Had leaders been open to difference of opinion, maybe they would have come to conclusions earlier so as to ensure a lot of people did not die for nothing. There's much to reflect on from this discussion. So I've posted an article on m1.radio.ie to supplement this interview. I hope you find it of interest. Please feel free to comment both online and through social media as well. Thank you very much. Stay with us for episodes coming up, where we'll be looking at topics of interest for those of you who are up and down and in and around the M1. I'm Garrett Mullen, and this is the M1 podcast, and thank you to David West for sound and editing.